Hello, and thank you for joining us for another session of Dino Talk. I'm Bobby Dino, and today's topic is prison hustles. Hustles. Yes, everybody in prison usually has one. But let's talk about how it works in there first. So when you go into the joint, you're assigned a job, okay? This job works towards your work time. You're given two types of credits to get your time reduced from what the original sentence is. You've got your good time and your work time. So if you came in with, let's say, on a 50% charge, which means that you get a certain amount of time, but you can end up doing half of that time or 50% as long as your good time and work time is established. Violent and serious crimes tended to get 80 and 85% time, which meant that you didn't get the work time credits, but you got the good time credits. So that's how they kept you from getting in trouble, was that as long as you were good, you can get time taken off your sentence. Now, even though you didn't get those work time credits, what they do is if somebody was just like, hey, I'm not gonna work then, screw it. Well, they'd say, okay, well, you're disobeying a direct order that says you have to work, so off your good time. So they still got people to work and do their job, right? Now, here's the thing. Prison jobs hardly pay anything. I'm talking like literal pennies on the hour. I think the least paying job I got was like 8 cents an hour. And I think the highest paying job I had was like 12 or 13 cents an hour. So you don't make anything, okay? It is a lot like slave labor in a sense, right? So what happens is if you don't have somebody on the streets that cares about you or anyone else for that matter sending you money, people get a hustle, okay? What that means is they'll find some way on the side to make money. Now, usually when you're talking about making money, it's trading goods, right? So somebody will do something and they'll say, okay, I want 15 bucks. Well, the person will come with $15 worth of store items or commissary items, and that's how they'll make the payment, okay? So there was a hustle for just about everything. I mean, you want to talk about some MacGyver shit, man, okay? You had the regular stuff, like one of the things that I did was writing, okay? People might want poems written for a loved one. They might need help with legal work. They might want their letters written nicely. That was stuff that I did while on the inside, and that's one of the reasons why I hate legal work today. It's just soul-sucking, just not fun to be a writer doing that stuff, right? But there was other stuff too. So you had drawing. People would draw things. They'd do portraits. Someone would bring them a picture of, let's say, a loved one, and they'd do a portrait of them or whatever the hell they wanted. And it wasn't just with pen either. There were dudes in there that had pastels. They had watercolors. And so you had some really good artists in there, surprisingly. There was also laundry. Believe it or not, dudes wouldn't want to turn in their stuff to the standard laundry and have it washed with everybody else's stuff. So sometimes they'd hire someone that would come and do their laundry for them. The person might iron it. There was an ironing board in every housing unit. You had to wait your turn to use it, and the cops would open it up at a certain time. It was attached to the wall. It'd come down. There was an iron. Sometimes the iron was broken. Then you wouldn't have an iron until they got another one, and so on and so forth. But there were dudes that would do other people's laundry, and guys wanted to look good going out to visit, so they'd get their stuff all ironed up and creased, the pants, all that. It was crazy, man. So here's where some of the stuff got interesting. You have guys that would work on electronics, right? So let's say you had like a Walkman or headphones, or we had small TVs, small radios. If something was wrong with it, these dudes would fix it. They would also make like little chargers. So like if your charger was broke, or if let's say you didn't have the charger for a certain item, you needed another one. I mean, these guys would screw around with everything. They'd make homemade stingers. Stingers are those water immersion heaters that you put in water and then plug into the wall. It'll start to make the water boil. So you have these dudes that, you'd think they were electronic engineers the way that they were working, but they'd sit there and tweak out on radios. It was crazy. Another hustle that they had was office support stuff. So you had these guys that worked in the support office, which was the office where the captain and the lieutenant and other, sergeant, they all had their little offices inside of this larger support office, right? So the guys that worked in there, like let's say you needed something copied for legal work, or you needed some pens, you needed some paper. You're a guy that draws, you don't have any more blank paper, you needed some, right? So you get at these guys and they do it in the support office, they bring it back, they sell you some state property, and that would be that, right? Then you had some of the more fun hustles, okay? You had guys that were tattoo artists. They'd sit there and people would come and pay them to do certain tattoos. Now, certain tattoos you couldn't get. If some tattoos you only get by putting in work, or you have to earn them, right? But I mean, like if a guy wanted, let's say his name on him, or if he wanted, a picture of something put on him, you had tattoo artists that would do this stuff. I've got a ton of them all over me. You also had the guys that made the tattoo guns. Now, this was interesting. What they do is they take a motor out of like a Walkman, sometimes a radio, but usually it was a Walkman. And then they would have the wires coming off the motor. They would either tape or glue or tie a ballpoint pen. They'd cut it in half to where it was the part where the pen part came out, and they'd attach it to that motor. Then you'd get a guitar string, which I had a guitar and I sold a bunch of string doing this. They'd take the big E, which is the largest string on the guitar. You unwind it because there's a core piece of metal inside of that wrap. And that core piece of metal being the biggest piece, they would sharpen it up and use it as a tattoo needle. And what they would do is they'd bend the end of it, they'd attach it to that motor. They had a little piece that they made to where it fit into where that motor went. And when that thing would turn, that gun would go up and down, and you'd be in business. So the tattoo was obviously a hustle, being a tattoo artist, making the stuff for the tattoo artists, the guns, selling string. Then you had dudes that would run tournaments. They'd run card tournaments. So whether it was playing poker, whether it was a pinochle tournament, a spades, hearts, whichever, they'd get a bunch of guys that would sign up. Everybody would kick in whatever the cost was. Like, let's say it was a few soups, or it was, $1 or $2 worth of stuff. And then they play it out. You have a tournament, you win stuff. I mean, there was also straight up gambling where sometimes people would play poker and they'd go at it, but the tournaments were really popular. The card tournaments, pinochle tournaments, those were super popular. You also had guys that made Pruno. Now, for those of you that don't know, Pruno is what they would call jailhouse wine. And they would get the sugar from the kitchen. Again, another hustle. Someone in the kitchen would sell them some sugar. They'd get some bread because they wanted to kick off the fermentation or whatnot. They'd get fruit. They put all types of different fruits in there too. It was basically whatever they had, whether it was oranges or peaches or whatever kind of fruit was available, apples. And these guys would make wine. And they'd let it cook, because as the fermentation happens, it's inside of a bag. It swells because gases are being released. So they'd let it cook, they'd burp it. If you lived in the same dorm or in the same cell as somebody who was doing this and they burped that stuff, you'd smell it from a mile away. But they'd make wine and then they'd sell it. And usually it was alcoholics making the wine because they wanted to drink it too. But, there was another hustle for people to do. Tobacco. Once tobacco became banned, I may have the date wrong on this, but I was inside when they did it. I want to say they cut tobacco out in 2005. It could have been 2006, but I want to say it was 2005. But anyways, so once tobacco became illegal, you'd have dudes that would, from the cops or from whoever, get it smuggled in. If it was a regular cigarette, like a real cigarette, they called those tailors. They were tailor-made. They'd take them apart. They'd roll 3 or 4 cigarettes out of them, and they'd sell them for a couple dollars a piece. So tobacco was an expensive habit. A little side note on that. There were a lot of cops that dipped. They'd have the chewing tobacco or whatever. And there were dudes, this is gross as shit, but it's real. There were dudes that they'd watch these cops out on the yard while they were dipping. And when the cop took his dip out or spit it out and, it was there on the ground, these guys would wait until the cop moved, then they'd run up and they'd grab it and scoop it up and they'd let it dry out and then they'd roll it up and sell it as tobacco. And, when you've got the urge, you got to meet it, I guess. So we've covered the pruno, the tobacco, and then obviously a big one in prison is the drugs. There was a few different ways to make money off of drugs. You could be the guy that was bringing it in. You'd have a family or a loved one come to visit. They'd have little balloons. You'd, at some point, either swallow the balloons or shove them up your ass during visit. You bring it back, you got dope. You could be the guy that was a visiting worker that was bringing it back for someone. So like, let's say it was too hot. The cops were looking too much and there was just no time to shove it up your ass or swallow it or whatnot. What you could do was you could go over by like one of the vending machines or where the microwave is, because they had microwavable food that you can get from the vending machines, and you'd leave it over there or something. And then the visiting worker would come along acting like he's cleaning it up. Oh, and he'd grab it. He had more of an opportunity to be by himself and to do stuff like that. And he'd hoop it or swallow it and take it back to the dorm. The thing with doing the drugs is that if a guy was suspected of doing that, they'd put him on Potty Watch. And what that is they'd stick him in a cell, right, where the toilets were covered, they didn't work, and they'd just wait. They'd wait until the dude had to go to the bathroom. And they'd wait, and they'd wait. And eventually, that dude would have to take a crap or do whichever, and then when he did, they'd come in, they'd see, okay, he did it or he didn't do it, and they'd progress from there. You could also be the guy that was holding the drugs for the drug dealer. That was a way that a lot of dudes came up. There were a lot of dope fiends that came up that way because it was a way for them to do free drugs, was be in the suitcase, they called it. The suitcase was the guy that kept the shit in his ass. And then when the drug dealer needed it, he'd say, okay, I need to take something out of the suitcase. The guy would go get it out. You'd handle your business, right? So there was a few different ways from making drugs that way. Also, another way, which I've written about it and it happens, is strong arming people. You could just take someone's shit. That could be your hustle. You could be the guy that protected a weak dude. Like, let's say a guy came in there, he's some weak guy, he's totally scared. You'd be the guy that'd be like, all right, well, you pay me however much a month, and I'll make sure nobody fucks with you. That happened a lot, and believe it or not, that happened a lot with child molesters and rapists and stuff. So what would happen is, and I wrote about this. There's a story on my blog called Big Gay Steve, the undercover guy. So these guys wouldn't want to get found out, so they'd pay someone off like, hey, don't let me get found out or whichever, and then they would, that's how the person would make their money. Now, the problem with that is that if you're protecting or hiding a child molester or rapist, that puts you on the same level as them, and you will be dealt with the same way. So it wasn't very safe to get into, and those guys almost always got caught. So not a good way. Another thing in prison, since we're talking about the gnarly stuff, you have sex workers. You got guys that'll come in, they'll say they're gay for the stay, right? Which means supposedly they're straight out on the streets, but when they come in, they'll start selling their ass, or they'll start messing around with homosexuals. Sometimes a homosexual would have a pimp, someone that would protect them. Other times they wouldn't. They'd just be a free agent. And if somebody wanted to get some type of sex activity, they'd charge them. That was a way that they made money. Before I left, a big way that people started making money, it was a big return on investment, was cell phones. cell phones became widely popular. I remember one time they did a sweep of my building and they got, I think, around 150 cell phones. And to put that in perspective, there's 300 people in each housing unit. So pretty crazy. And what would happen is these cops or free staff, and it was always cops or free staff who brought it in. Okay, always. And I wrote a story about that too. It's Jim Koch, if you want to look at bobbydino.com/blog. So they bring them in, they buy these Go phones or these burner phones, right, for like 20, 30, 40 bucks. They'd sell them for like $500 or $600. And the trippy thing is at the time, I don't know if they've done legislation since then, but at the time, it wasn't illegal because it had never happened. So there were no laws on the books saying it's a misdemeanor or a felony to introduce the phone into the prison. And there was also no law or books that says it's a misdemeanor or felony for you being an inmate having a phone, right? It was an infraction, more or less. So the way that the cops and the free staff looked at it was like, I can't get in trouble. I mean, I might get a write-up, but shit, I might also make 20 or 30 grand this month extra. So it was something that they did, okay? Point being, I'm sure that there's some I probably missed, but the point being is that people were super duper creative, okay? And there were all types of ways to make money. So next time we talk, we'll discuss something about some fights that I saw, some gnarly stuff. That's on the next show. But until then, you guys keep your eyes open and stay safe out there.